On an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the sun hung high in the sky, casting golden rays over a quiet Midwestern town. The streets were alive with the hum of everyday life, children playing on sidewalks, cars rolling by, and neighbors chatting on front porches. Among them was Maya Johnson, a 34-year-old single mother who had just finished picking up groceries from the local store. With 2 bags balanced in her arms, she walked briskly toward her apartment, eager to get home and start preparing dinner for her 8-year-old son. Maya wasn't someone who sought attention. She was known around the neighborhood as kind, hardworking, and always willing to lend a hand when needed. Whether it was organizing food drives for struggling families or volunteering at the community center, Maya's presence brought warmth and reliability to those around her. But despite her outward calm, she carried years of resilience within her, a strength forged through challenges most people couldn't imagine. As Maya approached the park near her building, she noticed 2 police officers leaning casually against their patrol car. They seemed relaxed, chatting and laughing as if they didn't have a care in the world. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about the scene. Cops often parked near the park to keep an eye on things. Maya slowed her pace, slightly, offering a polite nod as she passed by. It was meant as a simple gesture of acknowledgement, something she did out of habit whenever she crossed paths with authority figures. But what happened next would change everything. One of the officers, a tall man with sandy blonde hair and a smirk that never seemed to leave his face, called out to her. "Nice dress," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. His partner, shorter but equally smug, chuckled beside him. For a moment, Maya hesitated, unsure whether to respond or simply keep walking. Before she could decide, the blonde officer stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Without warning, he reached out and lifted the edge of her sundress, exposing her legs briefly before letting it fall back into place. Both men erupted into laughter, slapping each other on the back as though they'd just shared the funniest joke in the world. Their amusement echoed loudly, cutting through the peaceful atmosphere like a sharp knife. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Maya stood rooted to the spot, her grocery bags dangling loosely from her hands. Her cheeks burned hot with embarrassment, and her heart pounded so loudly she thought everyone nearby must hear it. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape the humiliation and retreat somewhere safe where no one could see her tears. But even as shame washed over her, another emotion began to rise: anger. This wasn't the first time Maya had encountered moments like this. Over the years, she'd faced countless instances of disrespect, both subtle and overt. From being followed around stores under suspicion of shoplifting to having strangers make rude comments about her appearance, these experiences had left scars that ran deeper than anyone could see. Yet something about this particular incident felt different. Maybe it was the deliberate act of violation, the way the officers treated her dignity as though it was theirs to toy with. Or maybe it was the realization that they believed they could do whatever they wanted without consequence. Whatever the reason, Maya found herself refusing to shrink away. Instead, she straightened her posture, squared her shoulders, and turned to face the men. Her voice, steady and firm despite the tremor threatening to break through, cut through their laughter like a whip. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your career," she said, locking eyes with the blonde officer. At first, the words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. The officers stopped laughing, their grins faltering as they processed what she'd said. For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across their faces, but it quickly gave way to dismissive smirks. The blonde officer waved a hand lazily, as if brushing off her comment. "Relax," he replied, his tone condescending. "It was just a joke." But Maya didn't relax. She didn't lower her gaze or mutter an apology for daring to speak up. Instead, she held her ground, staring at them with a mixture of defiance and determination. Inside, her mind raced. She knew she couldn't let this go unanswered. Not because she wanted revenge, but because staying silent would mean accepting that this kind of behavior was okay. And Maya refused to accept that. As she finally turned and continued walking toward her apartment, her thoughts swirled with possibilities. What could she do? Who would believe her? Would anyone care? Despite the doubts creeping in, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever been made to feel small, invisible, or powerless. This was about proving that actions have consequences, even when those committing them think they're untouchable. By the time Maya reached her doorstep, her resolve had hardened. She set the grocery bags down carefully, took a deep breath, and pulled out her phone. If the officers thought their joke would fade away unnoticed, they were sorely mistaken. Little did they know, their actions had ignited a spark in Maya, one that would soon grow into a fire neither of them could ignore. To truly understand why Maya reacted the way she did, one needs to look deeper into her life, into the experiences and lessons that shaped her into the strong, resilient woman standing up to those officers. Maya's journey hadn't been easy, but it had taught her something invaluable: how to rise above adversity and fight for what was right. Maya grew up in a small house on the outskirts of town, raised by her grandmother after both of her parents passed away when she was just 6 years old. Her grandmother, Louise, was a force to be reckoned with, a no-nonsense woman who believed in hard work, self-respect, and standing firm against injustice. Louise often told Maya stories about their family's history, stories filled with struggles but also triumphs. She spoke of ancestors who endured unimaginable hardships yet never lost their sense of dignity. "We don't bow our heads unless it's to pray," Louise would say, her voice steady and full of conviction. Those words became Maya's guiding principle. As a child, Maya quickly learned what it meant to face prejudice. At school, she was one of only a handful of black students, and she often felt like an outsider. Teachers overlooked her contributions, classmates made hurtful comments, and sometimes even strangers treated her as though she didn't belong. But Louise always reminded her that other people's opinions didn't define her worth. "You, hold your head high, baby girl," she'd say whenever Maya came home upset. "They can try to bring you down, but they'll never break you." Over time, Maya began to channel her frustrations into action. In high school, she joined the debate team, where she discovered her ability to articulate thoughts clearly and passionately. She started organizing fundraisers for underprivileged kids in her community, realizing early on that she had a knack for bringing people together. By the time she graduated, Maya knew she wanted to dedicate her life to helping others, especially those who felt voiceless. After college, Maya returned to her hometown, determined to make a difference. She worked multiple jobs to support herself and her son while volunteering at the local community center. There, she led workshops on financial literacy, hosted clothing drives, and mentored young people navigating challenges similar to the ones she'd faced growing up. Her efforts earned her respect among neighbors, many of whom saw her as a beacon of hope in a place that often felt forgotten. But Maya's path wasn't without obstacles. As a black woman, she encountered countless instances of bias and disrespect. Once, while shopping at a department store, she noticed a security guard following her closely, his eyes fixed on her every move. Another time, a landlord refused to rent her an apartment, citing reasons that didn't add up. Each incident stung, but instead of letting them crush her spirit, Maya used them as fuel to push forward. She reminded herself of her grandmother's advice: "When someone tries to dim your light, shine brighter." The incident with the officers wasn't the first time Maya had dealt with harassment. Years earlier, during her college days, a group of men at a bus stop had catcalled her, making lewd remarks about her appearance. At the time, Maya had felt powerless, unsure of how to respond. But later that evening, she poured her emotions into writing, crafting a poem about resilience and self-worth. The experience taught her that expressing herself, whether through words, actions, or art, was a powerful tool for reclaiming control. What set this moment apart, however, was its public nature. The officers' actions weren't just humiliating, they were a blatant misuse of power. To Maya, it represented everything she had spent her life fighting against: inequality, dehumanization, and the abuse of authority. This wasn't just about her dress being lifted, it was about being treated as though she didn't matter. And Maya couldn't let that slide. That night, as she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, Maya replayed the scene in her mind. Over and over again. She thought about the smirk on the blonde officer's face, the dismissive wave of his hand, and the laughter that followed. But more than anything, she thought about the countless others who might have gone through something similar and stayed silent. How many women had walked away from such encounters too afraid or ashamed to speak up? How many times had these officers acted this way before, confident that no one would challenge them? The realization hit Maya like a lightning bolt. If she didn't take a stand now, who would? She owed it not only to herself but to everyone else who had been wronged. This wasn't just her battle anymore. It was a chance to demand accountability and spark change. With renewed determination, Maya began drafting a plan. First, she reached out to a trusted friend who worked as a journalist, explaining what had happened and asking for advice. Her friend encouraged her to document everything: the date, time, location, and details of the encounter, as well as any potential witnesses. Next, Maya scoured social media for information about filing complaints against law enforcement. She discovered that there was a formal process for reporting misconduct, complete with forms and guidelines. But Maya knew paperwork alone wouldn't be enough. To ensure her voice was heard, she needed evidence. Thankfully, the park near her apartment had several security cameras installed along its perimeter. Hoping one of them had captured the incident, Maya decided to request footage from the local authorities. It was a long shot, but she was willing to try anything. As she worked late into the night, gathering documents and jotting down notes, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than her. She envisioned a ripple effect, a chain reaction, sparked by her courage that could lead to real change. What if sharing her story inspired others to come forward? What if it forced the police department to take a closer look at its practices? What if it reminded people everywhere that their voices mattered? By the time morning arrived, Maya felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, skepticism, and possibly backlash. But she also knew that staying silent wasn't an option. This was her moment to shine, to prove that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person could make a difference. And so, with her resolve stronger than ever, Maya prepared to take the next step. She didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but one thing was certain: she wouldn't back down. Not now, not ever. The next morning, Maya woke up with a sense of purpose that pushed aside any lingering fear or doubt. She had spent the night preparing herself mentally and emotionally for what lay ahead. Her decision to take action wasn't just about seeking justice for herself. It was about standing up for everyone who had ever been treated as though their dignity didn't matter. With her notes neatly organized and her mind clear, she headed to the police station to file a formal complaint. Walking into the building felt surreal. The atmosphere inside was cold and sterile, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and officers moving briskly through the halls. At the front desk, a uniformed clerk greeted her with an indifferent expression. "How can I help you?" he asked, his tone flat and mechanical. Maya took a deep breath before speaking. "I'm here to file a complaint against 2 officers," she said firmly, placing her written statement on the counter. The clerk glanced at it briefly, then raised an eyebrow. "Do you have any evidence to support this claim?" he asked, skepticism creeping into his voice. Maya nodded, explaining that there were security cameras near the park where the incident occurred. She requested access to the footage, hoping it would provide undeniable proof of what had happened. The clerk hesitated, jotting down her request but offering no promises. As she left the station, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that her complaint might be brushed aside. But she refused to let that discourage her. If anything, it fueled her determination even more. Later that day, Maya met with a local civil rights attorney named Rachel Carter, someone her journalist friend had recommended. Rachel listened intently as Maya recounted every detail of the encounter, her face growing increasingly serious. "This is unacceptable," Rachel said when Maya finished. "We need to make sure your voice is heard, and not just by the police department." Rachel suggested taking the case to social media, knowing it could amplify Maya's message and draw attention to the issue. Though Maya initially hesitated, she wasn't someone who sought the spotlight. She realized that sharing Her story publicly might be the only way to hold the officers accountable. Together, they crafted a post detailing the incident, emphasizing the broader implications of unchecked police misconduct. They included screenshots of relevant laws and policies, along with calls to action encouraging others to demand accountability. That evening, Maya posted the story on her personal social media accounts, tagging local news outlets and advocacy groups. Within hours, the response was overwhelming. Friends, neighbors, and strangers alike flooded her inbox with messages of support. Some shared their own experiences of harassment or abuse of power, thanking Maya for having the courage to speak out. Others pledged to contact the police department and demand answers. By the next morning, her post had gone viral, sparking outrage across the community. The backlash against the officers was swift and intense. Protesters began gathering outside the police station, holding signs that read, "Respect is non-negotiable," and "No one deserves this treatment." Local news crews arrived to cover the demonstrations, interviewing Maya and other activists about the need for systemic reform. For the first time in years, conversations about police accountability dominated headlines, not just in her town but across the state. Despite the growing momentum, Maya faced resistance from unexpected places. Anonymous trolls began targeting her online, leaving hateful comments and accusing her of exaggerating the situation. Some even went so far as to suggest she deserved what happened because of how she dressed. Reading those messages stung, but Maya refused to let them silence her. Instead, she leaned on her support system, her son, her grandmother's memory, and the countless allies rallying behind her. One particularly touching moment came during a community meeting held at the local library. Dozens of residents packed into the small room to discuss the incident and brainstorm ways to push for change. A young woman stood up, tears streaming down her face, and thanked Maya for inspiring her to share her own story of mistreatment by law enforcement. Another speaker, an elderly man, talked about raising his grandchildren in a world where they constantly feared being judged based on the color of their skin. Each story reinforced Maya's belief that this fight was bigger than her. It was about creating a safer, fairer future for everyone. As the days turned into weeks, Maya became a prominent figure in the movement for justice. She appeared on local television shows, answering tough questions with grace and conviction. She spoke at rallies, her voice steady as she called for transparency and accountability within the police force, and she collaborated with lawmakers to draft legislation aimed at addressing harassment and abuse of power by law enforcement officers. Her tireless efforts earned her national recognition, including invitations to speak at conferences and events focused on civil rights. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of Maya's journey was the way it brought people together. Strangers, who had never met before, found common ground in their shared desire for change. Families who rarely discussed politics suddenly began talking about systemic racism and inequality at the dinner table. Even some members of the police department expressed private support for Maya's cause, acknowledging that reform was long overdue. Throughout it all, Maya remained grounded. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, disappointments, and moments of doubt. But she also knew that staying silent was no longer an option. Every step she took, every word she spoke, brought her closer to the justice she sought, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel powerless. By the end of the month, the pressure on the police department had become impossible to ignore. Calls for accountability poured in from all directions, from citizens, advocacy groups, and even government officials. The officers involved in the incident were placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. While this was a small victory, Maya understood that true change would require much more than disciplinary action against two individuals. It would require a fundamental shift in how authority figures interacted with the communities they served. Still, Maya allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. What had started as a deeply personal humiliation had grown into something far greater, a catalyst for transformation. As she sat in her living room one evening, watching videos of protests and reading heartfelt messages from supporters, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for her strength, for her community, and for the countless people standing alongside her in this fight. Though the battle was far from over, Maya knew one thing for certain. She had ignited a spark that couldn't be extinguished. And as long as she kept fighting, neither could anyone else. The internal investigation into the officer's actions dragged on for weeks, testing Maya's patience and resolve. While the police department claimed they were taking the matter seriously, leaks to the press suggested otherwise. Sources within the department hinted that investigators were attempting to downplay the severity of the incident, portraying it as a harmless prank rather than an abuse of power. This revelation infuriated Maya, who had worked tirelessly to ensure her voice, and the voices of countless others, was heard. Determined not to let the momentum fade, Maya organized a march through downtown to demand transparency and accountability. The event was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon, giving people plenty of time to participate without clashing with work or school commitments. Flyers were distributed throughout the community, social media posts spread like wildfire, and local radio stations announced the march daily. By the time the day arrived, hundreds of supporters had gathered at the park where the incident had occurred, ready to stand shoulder to shoulder with Maya. The atmosphere was electric. People carried signs with bold messages. Justice over. Excuses. Accountability starts here, and our bodies, our dignity. Some wore t-shirts emblazoned with Maya's name, while others brought drums and megaphones to amplify their chants. As Maya stood at the front of the crowd, flanked by fellow activists and community leaders, she felt a surge of emotion. Seeing so many people united for a common cause reminded her why she had chosen to fight in the first place. Before the march began, Maya addressed the crowd, her voice steady, yet filled with passion. "This isn't just about me," she said, gripping the microphone tightly. "It's about every person who has ever been made to feel small, invisible, or powerless. It's about holding those in positions of authority accountable for their actions. And most importantly, it's about reminding ourselves that we deserve respect, no matter who we are or where we come from." Her words resonated deeply, drawing cheers and applause from the crowd. As the march moved through the streets, it attracted even more participants. Drivers honked their horns in solidarity, pedestrians stopped to join in, and curious onlookers snapped photos to share online. The energy was contagious, spreading far beyond the immediate vicinity of the protest. By the time the group reached the steps of the police station, the number of demonstrators had swelled to over 1,000. At the station, Maya took the stage once again, this time reading aloud a list of demands. Among them were calls for stricter consequences for misconduct, mandatory sensitivity training for all officers, and independent oversight of investigations involving law enforcement personnel. She also emphasized the need for systemic reforms, not just within the police department but across all institutions that wielded power over marginalized communities. Her speech struck a chord, earning thunderous applause and cries of agreement from the crowd. Despite the overwhelming public support, Maya faced pushback from unexpected quarters. Anonymous threats began appearing in her inbox, warning her to drop the case or face consequences. One message read, "You're playing with fire, lady. Back off before you get burned." Another accused her of stirring up trouble and dividing the community. Though these messages unsettled her, Maya refused to let fear dictate her actions. Instead, she leaned on her network of allies, sharing her concerns with trusted friends and advisors who helped bolster her confidence. One particularly challenging moment came when a local news outlet aired an interview with one of the officers involved in the incident. In the segment, the officer claimed he had meant no harm and described his actions as a harmless joke gone wrong. He went on to accuse Maya of exaggerating the situation for attention, painting her as someone seeking revenge rather than justice. Watching the interview left Maya fuming, but it also strengthened her resolve. If anything, the officer's dismissive attitude highlighted exactly why accountability was so crucial. To counteract the negative narrative, Maya appeared on several talk shows and podcasts, using her platform to reiterate the importance of respecting boundaries and treating everyone with dignity. She spoke candidly about the emotional toll the incident had taken on her, describing how it had shaken her sense of safety and self-worth. But she also emphasized that her goal wasn't vengeance, it was change. "I'm not doing this because I hate cops," she explained during one appearance. "I'm doing this because I believe in fairness. I believe in justice, and I believe we can do better." As the weeks turned into months, the pressure on the police department became unbearable. With protests continuing, lawsuits looming, and public outrage reaching a fever pitch, officials finally announced that disciplinary action would be taken against the officers involved. Both men were formally reprimanded, stripped of their badges, and barred from working in law enforcement ever again. While some critics argued that the punishment didn't go far enough, Maya saw it as a step in the right direction, a sign that accountability was possible, even in the face of entrenched resistance. But Maya didn't stop there. Recognizing the need for lasting change, she threw herself into advocacy work, collaborating with lawmakers and advocacy groups to draft legislation aimed at preventing similar abuses of power in the future. One of her key initiatives focused on establishing independent review boards to oversee complaints against law enforcement officers. These boards, composed of civilians rather than fellow officers, would provide an unbiased perspective and help restore trust between communities and the authorities meant to protect them. Maya also worked to address broader issues of systemic inequality, such as racial profiling and economic disparities. She organized town hall meetings where residents could voice their concerns directly to city officials, launched educational campaigns to raise awareness about civil rights, and partnered with schools to teach children about consent and respect. Her efforts earned her widespread recognition, including awards from civil rights organizations and invitations to speak at national conferences. Through it all, Maya remained humble, always deflecting praise onto the community that had supported her. "This isn't my victory," she often said. "It's ours. Every person who marched, donated, or shared their story played a part in making this happen." Her humility endeared her to even more people, solidifying her status as a leader and role model. By the end of the year, the impact of Maya's activism was undeniable. Not only had she sparked significant reforms within the police department, but she had also inspired countless individuals to take a stand against injustice in their own lives. Families began having open conversations about race and privilege. Students started petitions demanding diversity training in schools, and businesses implemented policies to promote inclusivity and equity. The ripple effect of Maya's courage extended far beyond her initial goal, creating a wave of positive change that showed no signs of slowing down. Still, Maya knew the fight was far from over. Systemic issues couldn't be solved overnight, and there would always be new battles to wage. But she approached each challenge with the same determination and resilience that had carried her this far. Whether speaking at rallies, meeting with policymakers, or mentoring young activists, Maya continued to shine as a beacon of hope and strength. Looking back on everything she had accomplished, Maya felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for her own growth, but for the unity and progress she had witnessed in her community. What had started as a single act of defiance had grown into a movement, proving that even in the darkest moments, courage could ignite change. And as long as there were people willing to stand up and speak out, Maya believed that brighter days lay ahead, for herself, her son, and generations to come. Months after the incident that had sparked a firestorm of activism, Maya's life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. The two officers involved were formally reprimanded and stripped of their badges, a decision that sent shockwaves through the community. While some argued the punishment wasn't severe enough, most agreed it was a significant step toward accountability. For Maya, however, this outcome was only the beginning. What truly mattered to her was the ripple effect her courage had created, a wave of change that was reshaping not just her town, but also the lives of countless others. The incident became a turning point for the police department. Under mounting public pressure, officials implemented sweeping reforms aimed at preventing similar abuses of power in the future. New policies were introduced requiring mandatory sensitivity training for all officers, focusing on topics like consent, de-escalation tactics, and cultural competency. An independent oversight board was established to review complaints against law enforcement personnel, ensuring investigations were conducted fairly and transparently. These changes weren't perfect. Maya knew there was still much work to be done, but they represented progress, something she hadn't dared to hope for when she first walked into the police station to file her complaint. For Maya personally, the journey had been transformative. What started as a moment of humiliation had evolved into a mission, a purpose that gave her life new meaning. Her activism didn't stop with the police department. She expanded her efforts to tackle broader issues affecting marginalized communities. She founded an organization called Respect Rising, dedicated to supporting victims of harassment and abuse of power. Through workshops, legal aid clinics, and advocacy campaigns, Respect Rising provided resources and a platform for those who felt voiceless, empowering them to speak up and demand justice. Maya's work quickly gained national attention. She traveled across the country, speaking at conferences, universities, and rallies about the importance of dignity, accountability, and systemic reform. Her speeches were powerful yet relatable, filled with personal anecdotes and lessons learned along the way. She often shared stories from people she had met during her advocacy work: single mothers fighting eviction, teenagers standing up to bullies, elderly individuals resisting ageism. Each story underscored the same message: everyone deserves respect no matter their background or circumstances. Despite her growing fame, Maya remained grounded. She continued living in her modest apartment, balancing her activism with raising her son Marcus. Now 9 years old, Marcus had watched his mother transform from someone quietly enduring injustices to a fearless leader inspiring thousands. He admired her deeply, often telling her how proud he was of everything she had accomplished. "You're my hero, Mom," he'd say, hugging her tightly. Those words meant more to Maya than any award or recognition ever could. One of the most rewarding aspects of Maya's journey was seeing how it inspired others to take action. In her hometown, neighbors who had once kept to themselves now came together regularly to discuss ways to improve their community. A group of high school students launched a campaign to educate their peers about consent and healthy relationships. Local businesses began hosting diversity workshops for employees, recognizing the value of inclusivity and fostering trust and understanding. Even some members of the police force reached out privately to thank Maya for pushing them to reflect on their practices and strive for better. Years later, Maya reflected on how far she and her community had come. The park where the incident occurred had become a symbol of resilience and unity. On its grounds stood a mural painted by local artists, depicting scenes of strength, solidarity, and hope. At the center of the mural was a quote Maya often repeated: "Dignity is not negotiable." It served as a reminder of what they had fought for, and what they would continue to fight for in the years ahead. When asked in interviews how she found the strength to stand up to those officers, Maya always answered with humility. "I didn't do it alone," she'd say, smiling softly. "I did it because I knew I wasn't the only one who had been hurt. I did it for every person who ever felt powerless, invisible, or unworthy. And I did it because someone has to remind the world that we all deserve respect." Her legacy extended beyond policy changes or accolades. Maya had ignited a movement, one rooted in empathy, courage, and collective action. People who had never considered themselves activists now saw themselves as agents of change, capable of making a difference in their own corners of the world. Families taught their children the importance of treating others with kindness and respect. Teachers incorporated discussions about equity and justice into their lesson plans. Lawmakers cited Maya's story as inspiration for drafting progressive legislation. Even as time passed, Maya stayed committed to her cause. She understood that systemic change required patience and persistence. There would always be new challenges to face, new battles to wage. But she approached each obstacle with the same determination that had carried her through the darkest moments of her journey. Whether mentoring young activists, organizing community events, or simply listening to someone share their struggles, Maya continued to shine as a beacon of hope and resilience. Looking back, Maya realized that the incident, the very thing that had once left her feeling humiliated and powerless, had ultimately given her the greatest gift of all, purpose. It had shown her that even in moments of despair, there is power in standing up and speaking out. It had taught her that while one person can spark change, true transformation requires a community united by shared values and goals. And it had reminded her that no matter how daunting the odds may seem, courage and perseverance can move mountains. As she stood before a crowd at a rally years later, her voice rang out clear and strong. "We've come so far," she said, scanning the sea of faces before her. "But we still have so much farther to go. Let's keep fighting. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone who deserves a world where dignity isn't a privilege, but a right." The cheers that followed were deafening, echoing through the streets and filling the air with hope. Maya smiled, knowing that the fight was far from over, but also knowing that as long as people refused to stay silent, the future would always hold promise.